Thank you for coming.
Perfect. Thank you for having us, guys. As mentioned, my name is James Sutcliffe. I am a self-confessed business nerd, is my first admission. So by that, I mean, I love everything about business. So if you're a founder, I don't just want to know what you do. I want to know how you do it, the numbers behind it, what are the restrictions and the challenges, what's possible, and everything in between in granular detail. And it's that passion turned obsession that led me to launch the Founder Network nearly 3 years ago today. And effectively, we're a community of 1,000 of the world's most innovative founders spread across London, Berlin, and New York. And it's done with the understanding that, look, no matter what a founder's experience or background, when it comes to their own business, they just can't be an expert in every area of that business. So when you think how diverse that is, everything from legal to marketing to sales to team management, whatever it is, they just can't be an expert in all of it. So we've sort of taken on that challenge of, right, well, how do we create the community that truly is? And it's amazing to see that actually when you're part of a network that is like-minded but very diverse, that's sharing ideas, challenges, contacts, whatever it may be, just how efficiently you can then scale. So we have truly taken that upon ourselves. For us and for me personally, you will have all seen a load of TV shows and movies around startups and business that I, for one, love. I'm sure you're the same, but quickly come to realize that actually it's great entertainment, but it doesn't really reflect my life or the startups' lives that within our community. They glamorize it to an extent that it's just not reality. So for us, as part of the Founder Network, we actually took it upon ourselves to go out and create that show. So last year, we went and filmed a documentary called Founders Changing the World, where we went out to really explore the mindsets, the ambitions, but actually, really importantly, the sacrifices that come with founder life. So we picked 15 of the founders from our community, Tess being one of them, who you'll hear from in a little bit. And we went and spent a day at their offices with their teams. Many of them we went and spent time at their homes with their families, and we interviewed all of them. And it painted a very real but very raw and not always easy to watch picture of what life as a high-growth founder is really like. And I'm sure, as many of you all know from the experience you've got, it's certainly not all ping pong tables and beer o'clock. So I'd love to show you the trailer to that documentary just to give you a bit of a flavor as to what the Founder Network's all about, and then we can chat further.
It's tough enough starting a business to meet the needs of today's world. But it's a completely different mindset when a founder expects a lot to change around them.
Hi, I'm Tess.
I'm Dave.
I'm Sage.
And my company, Remedy House.
Why Henry is changing the world. Get ready to know more about yourself than you do about anything.
As obsessed as I am about it, it does consume you all of your waking time. You've got to prioritise and you've got to compartmentalise.
It did absorb a lot of my life. It was all negative feedback. Came in the next day to the office just crying.
That was the first time I really felt scared.
Sometimes I sit in the bottom of my shower and I cry because at the end of the day, you can't share with anybody.
So why are you doing this? Why not just get a nice, comfortable 9 to 5?
A comfortable 9 to 5 job would be my idea of hell.
The objective is to change the world. It's about sustainability and leaving behind that legacy.
In about 20 to 30 years' time, there are going to be maybe 5 or 6 companies which pretty much run the solar system. Probably going to be the biggest company in the 21st century.
It is such a privilege to be doing this. I wouldn't have it any other way.
Pretty cringe watching yourself, isn't it? That'll give you a good idea as to what the Founder Network's all about and who we're here for and what we stand for, more importantly. So, look, today the three of us are really eager to bring value to you and make sure we're chatting about the things that you want to talk about. So, as mentioned, we'll each speak for sort of 5 minutes, 5-10 minutes, and then we'll go into a Q&A, so feel free to ask just about anything. Just about anything, and we'll be happy to answer it. But I guess just to give us a bit of context, who here has already started a business? Perfect. And who here plans to in the very near future, over the next year or two? Okay, anyone here just out of interest? Doesn't want to launch a business? Okay, that's always fair enough as well. Cool. Okay, I think one of the first things that I'll start off with, and it was a bit of a realization of mine that I've never really spoken about publicly, and it will be very, very relevant to some people in here, and for those people I think it's extremely important. And that is, and I guess to give you some background, I come from what I'd call a very corporate family. Just about all my relatives came out of education, went into large corporates, with the goal of really climbing the ranks if they can make it to the top of that. Some successfully, some not so. But in my mind, I always heard about them talking about starting businesses and different business ideas and just never saw it happen. They always stayed to that corporate route. So in my mind, it was something that everyone wanted to do. Everyone wanted to start a business, but very few went for it. So in my head, that dream of mine, that sort of burning ambition of mine, became almost out of reach. It became as attainable as becoming a footballer or an actor or whatever it may be. If everyone wants to do it, then maybe everyone can't do it. So I guess the first point is that realization I had that actually when you get talking to people, not everyone wants to run a business, whether it's a big corporate or starting a business. Not everyone wants that pressure or stress or whatever it may be. So I think just very importantly, if that is a burning desire of yours, please do not be sheepish about that. I think it's a very much attainable career goal and trajectory to go on, is to actually start your own business. So I think that would absolutely be my first point. And I think if that relates to you, I'm sure you've heard 100 times, now is the best time to start that business. I'm sure loads of people have said that to you. And look, I get it. Right now, you're on your courses, you'll have exams, then post-graduation and post the course, you'll get into a job, you may take out a car to loan or get a mortgage, and it's never the right time. And I was also caught up in that race of it not being the right time. So again, to give you background, I had a great job previously. I was coming up for a very big promotion. I had a baby on the way, and then there was murmurs of a pandemic hitting our shores pretty shortly as well. So definitely not the right time, but I was debating whether I should go off and start a business, and that business turned out to be the Founding Network. So the thing that I got into my head that really changed my mind on actually I should go for this was, although I had a lot going on, I realized it was the hardest point in my life to start a business, but actually it was the easiest it was ever going to be. Because if I waited another couple of years, we might have a second child on the way, which we do actually, which would mean we might need more space, we might need a bigger mortgage. I would have taken that promotion and there would have been more pressure. And anyone that has started a business or tried to leave a company will know that higher salary, although it's a blessing, it's a bit of a curse because it traps you into it as well. So as I say, I think this works for just about everyone in this room, so I would apply it to your lives. I'll repeat it again. It is the hardest point in your life to start a business, but I promise you it'll be the easiest it'll ever be. So I would consider that now. And I think once you figured out what that business is just a point of starting with intent, right? So start living with intent. Start thinking about what your own pain points in life are. What bothers you? Perhaps solving one of those issues might be just enough to create an incredible business. So I think that part of living with intent, and a big part of that is start thinking about your own network. So this is incredibly important, and it's why I started the Founding Network, is to start thinking about your own communities and networks. And look, you're at one of the greatest universities in the world, right? So all the best minds are being brought to you. So although you're paying for an education or a course, the networking is free. So please take advantage of that. And I think one of the great things is the university's done the hard work for you. They've brought the best people together, and then they've even divided them up into their interests and expertise. So make sure you're talking to people that are studying marketing, finance, legal, and get to know all of them. I promise you those connections will be so useful going forward. And I think just when you've got that business idea, for me, there's a point where you've got to be really rigid and really flexible. So for me, you've got to be absolutely rigid in why you're starting your business, your purpose, why are you doing that? And I would never waver from that. And I think you've also got to be rigid in where you want to take the business ultimately. But I'm sure you guys will agree, everything in between fluctuates and moves, and you have to be completely flexible. And it's not always an easy feeling, but I think something you're forced into as a founder. So I guess just to end my part on this, I think today we're going to talk a lot about the ups and downs of founder life and things of that nature. And as you saw just in the trailer, there's a lot of them that we can get into today. But one of the things that I find so inspiring, and particularly through filming the documentary, was actually the practicalities of running a business are so apparent. What's not is actually, for a high-growth founder, the strain on relationships, the mental toll, the constant pressure and stress. But what's actually really inspiring is, and you will have seen in the documentary, all those founders still think it's completely worth it for their mission, their business is on, and chasing that purpose. And as Tess said, they wouldn't have it any other way. So thank you for listening. And what I'll do now is bring Tess up.
Thanks, James. Watching yourself in a documentary is not something you think you'd ever do. But I was planning this and said to my housemate, I think I'm going to wing it. And she was like, that is the worst idea you've ever had. So it's like, I'm going to make bullet points. So I think if I can sum up the life of a founder, it is that you need bullet points of your own story, because you forget your story, because there's so much you learn along the way. So I thought what I'd do is tell you a little bit about what we're building, give you 2 of the lessons that I learned the hard way, and then 2 pieces of advice on those, if at all helpful. So Bea Fertility is a medical devices company. We are working on solving what we call the global fertility crisis. So depending on who you speak to, in the next 50 years, it's highly likely that every single couple, family, human who's trying to create a child will need some form of intervention to get there. And what we are doing is creating accessible, affordable home fertility care. So today, of all of the people who need clinical intervention, about 3% are able to access it. And it doesn't seem right, doesn't seem fair. So we're creating fertility treatments and medical devices that people can use at home. A little bit of my founding story. We created the company. I incorporated Bea 3 days before we went into our first lockdown. I probably took about a year working on this. My co-founder was an embryologist, and he had a family, so couldn't join full-time. So he was still working with his company. I worked on Bea in the day, and then I used to teach executive education programs. So in the pandemic, when these went virtual, I would run courses in Latin America. So I'd work on Bea in the day, and then I'd teach at night from my kitchen to make money and be able to afford to create this company. And then we got to a point where we had a strong enough concept, strong enough story, 3D print prototypes were looking good. I did way too much product testing. Don't talk to me about the plastic shavings that 3D printers put out into the world. But we got to a point where we were ready to start fundraising. And I think that's where things started to get really interesting. We raised a very quick, well, it wasn't a quick pre-seed, it took a very long time, but we raised 500K pre-seed, quickly won an Innovate UK grant. I made my first 2 hires a month later. Within 6 months, we went from a team of 1 to a team of 9. And then in the final month of the year, I closed a £2 million note. Just when you think life is good, just when you think you've gotten to a point where maybe things will steady out, they don't. And I think to that end, the 2 lessons that I thought I'd share are probably really important is, this was one that when we're teaching executive education programs, I used to teach pharmaceutical companies, and the one thing that we used to say was strategy is situation specific. So your objectives, your vision, your mission, none of that should change. But how you get there is dependent on the situation you find yourself in, and that should be able to change. And created the strategy. It was like, God, this took so long, and this is such a great strategy, this shit's never changing. You will learn more about yourself than anything. You'll learn how resilient you are. So raising that 500K took me 6 months, and I spoke to 284 people to get 15 people on my cap table. So it was extremely painful, but when there's no other option, you actually learn how resilient you are. So I think that was one of the things that I sort of learned about myself. I think be humble. When I first started raising that funding round, I have never founded a company before, so I Googled how to raise money in London. And you wouldn't believe the stuff that comes up. I actually bought the pocketbook guide to raising money, and I took it home and I read it over the holidays, and my parents were like, we're going to be on the payroll for a little bit longer. But actually the pocketbooks are really good. So like, you learn how resilient you are, but also be honest with yourself about what you do and don't know. Be open to learning, because the minute you shut that down, you're never going to go anywhere. And I think those are really some of the key things. I think I get asked a lot how I got started. And actually, there's sort of a bunch of things that when you decide that you're going to start, generally speaking, books, colleagues, advice, friends. One of the key pieces of advice that I wish that I had been given was, there are moments in this journey where you need to be original and creative and think and come up with all of your own systems. And there are moments in this journey where you need to engage in what we call startup R&D, where the R and the D stand for rob and duplicate. So do you need an ESOP plan? Great, don't reinvent it. Index Ventures has a fantastic one, compensation shares. Do you need an advisor agreement? Great, the Founder Institute, the FAST agreement has a fantastic framework. Don't reinvent it, go and steal that one. Do you need a mission? Do you need a strategy? Absolutely, you need to be sitting down and thinking that through. But there are moments in this journey where you do need to be original and creative. There are moments where you just don't reinvent the wheel. I guarantee someone out there is smarter than you and did it once before. Go and grab what they've done. It's out there in the world. And the biggest lesson I suppose I can say from that is learn quickly to differentiate between the moments when you need to be original and the moments when you just need to be humble and go and rob and duplicate someone else's work. And then I think the final thing, James, you were saying, like, where do you get the idea? Kind of brings me to my last point, which is I get asked a lot, like, how do you come up with an idea? And I was reading an article the other day about digital transformation. But actually, take out the word digital, and it rings just as true. And what it said is transformation is a process that makes what was once scarce abundant. And if you look at black cabs, Uber, hotels, Airbnb, the biggest companies that exist in the world today are the companies that have transformed something. They have taken something that is scarce and they have made it abundant. And that in a way I read that and I thought, God, that's what we're doing at Bayer. You know, the clinical world and clinical intervention, scarce. We are taking clinical interventions and making them abundant, bringing them into the home. And I think when, particularly in healthcare and in a lot of areas, there are advancements. So there are ideas that really push the boundaries of a field, that really push something forward. And there are some amazing businesses to be had in advancements. And then there are transformations, businesses that completely change how people access and access services and products and things that improve their lives in the world. And what I would encourage anyone who's looking for an idea to do is look for transformation. Look where there is scarcity and figure out if there is a way that you can make that abundant. Because I guarantee you, more than ever today, I think that humanity needs a lot more transformation. So if you're looking for ideas there, pretty good place to start. That's it from me though, James. It's my 10 minutes.
Just going to go straight up. Hello, everybody. I'm Jen. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Loanhood, which is the company I'm co-founder of. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself and my co-founders. So hopefully that will give you the information to ask me questions afterwards. So Loanhood is a fashion rental platform. It's a kind of hybrid peer-to-peer, which means that you can upload your own clothes to the platform and rent them out. But also, in fact, let me just say, we started out, that is going to be peer-to-peer. It's all going to be about opening up your wardrobes, sharing what you have with other people, making some money off the back of it. But what we discovered during lockdown, when there so many fashion professionals were basically on furlough at home, they started making things themselves, and they were upcycling, and they were making their own little micro brands, and they wanted to come onto the platform. So we definitely sort of started with a plan and evolved in response to what was going on in the world. If you don't know, if fashion isn't important to you personally, let me tell you that it's an absolutely massive industry. and about 1 in 6 people on the planet work in the fashion supply chain one way or another. So not only is it big in people, in big in numbers, there's a lot of money involved as well. But we have a big problem. We have a kind of addiction to it. We buy, we get a buzz, and then we buy again because the buzz wore off. At the moment, we're throwing away, in the UK, we throw away. We have this kind of, we buy, we hoard, and we chuck. And we're buying at an incredible rate, and we're throwing away about 11 million garments a week. And that is predominantly made out of plastic. So in fact, what we're looking at here is a massive environmental issue. The fashion industry has problems in lots of different directions, in mental health and wellness and so on, but it's a huge environmental issue. And if it carries on at the rate it currently is, thinking about the materials being used to make the clothes, a lot of that is petrochemical based. 60% of fibres are made out of plastic, essentially. And then the transportation and the packaging and running the stores and running the websites, everything else. At that rate, by 2050, 25% of our carbon budget globally will be used on the fashion industry, which is slightly outrageous. That is our motivation. That, for us as founders, that is our motivation. That is unacceptable. We were all working in the fashion industry. I was working in graphic design and branding. I've worked for loads of high street to high-end brands, right down from kind of New Look near the bottom to Manalo Blahnik and Yoox Net-a-Porter and kind of everything in between. Jade, my co-founder, was a model for 12 years. She went back to London College of Fashion, is now doing her PhD. And Lucy, my other co-founder, was a model booker. So we're very much on the promoting side of fashion. And each of us were in our little silos, very uncomfortable with the industry that we saw around us. I was sat in an office at Net-a-Porter, 600 people in this incredible, like, white, glamorous office with my headphones on, listening to podcasts about sustainability and muttering to the people around me about this is all BS and, like, we're doing the wrong things with our lives, what are we doing? Meanwhile, Lucy and Jade were on their own kind of little journeys from that point of view. And we found each other. They knew each other already. I knew Jade, friend of a friend. It's one of those things. So I think what you were saying before, it's sort of, if you already know what business you want to set up, brilliant. If you're not sure, find something that you're interested in, passionate about, and talk to everybody about it, and listen to as many podcasts as you can, and read as much stuff as you can, because it will come to you. So for me, Lonehood made sense immediately. Jade came up with the idea while she was doing her master's, looking at the systems involved in fashion and what we could do that would be exciting and interesting enough to young people to wean them off the fast fashion system. And she came up with this rental idea. When she spoke to me about it, I was like, well, yeah, sure. I used to work for Moss Bros, and they've been doing rentals since like 1894. It's nothing new. It's just not been done with tech before, which is the thing that accelerates it and could make it something massive. So that is kind of how we came together. We started before the pandemic, and at that point there were no other rental platforms in the UK. Now there are. We're not the only ones. We're not the first fashion rental platform. We're not going to be that. And I think if you've got a business like ours, where actually I'd say almost any business, so you're kind of in your bubble and you've got this amazing idea and you're working on it, and it might be years before it comes to market, and someone else is probably reading and seeing all the same things that you are and being influenced by the same things as you are, and they may be coming up with like the same idea, basically. And that's quite scary when you start to see them pop up and you're thinking like, oh, have I wasted the last year and a half of my life? But I would say if you kind of have if it's some kind of consumer good especially, or consumer platform, then it's really important to know your audience and know who you are targeting specifically. So for us, we are focused on a young audience, Gen Z, very kind of the like 18 to 25-year-olds. They're still going out. I'm not still going out. They're still going out clubbing. Like everything's an occasion. They care what they wear to college. They care what they wear to a nightclub. They're going to festivals. It's that kind of life. And when we keep that really strongly in our minds, when the other platforms have cropped up, it's like, oh, it's fine. It's not a problem. Functionally, it does the same as our business, but actually, they're targeting a completely different audience. All the other rental platforms right now are focused on millennial women. We are Gen Z is, Gen Z a bit of a catch-all, but and it's menswear, women's wear, ungendered, so we're full gender spectrum. And like immediately, it's like they're talking to a totally different audience. And we talk about Depop as an example of that. So if I am now 40, but even at the age of 35, if I said to my friends, oh, Depop, blah, 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 because I work in the fashion industry, so I was aware of it. And they go, yeah. And I was like, do you know what Depop is? And they say, no, actually, no, I don't. And what it is a platform for young people to resell their clothes to other young people. And because all the marketing is done through like social media and it's targeted, if you're over 25, you've never heard of it. And it's a massive company, and like 1 in 3 18 to 25-year-olds in the UK have a Depop account. It's huge. So if you've got a business and you see that someone else has launched functionally the same business, like just take a breath and know your market, know who you're trying to target, and say, is it actually the same business as us? Because for us, the others are not. No one is quite doing what we're looking to launch and do. I'm going to leave it at that because I like answering questions, so I'd like to know.
And I think the thing that I had on my side is when you are creating a mission-led business, people actually do want to help you out. We were a bit of a tricky investment proposition. So we take all of the direct-to-consumer, the sort of marketing risk of being a consumer-facing brand, and all of the regulatory risk of being a devices and a hardware company, and we mash those together and we go, please give us some money. And investors were all like, no. But if someone says no to you, ask them who else you should be speaking to. I think the first thing I did was a wee coffee pitch night. On Zoom, there were probably 20 people in the audience, 4 investors on a panel, and I started there. And I applied to pitch, we got on, I did it, and from those 4 panel members, you just end up going from there. I looked at female investors on LinkedIn, you send them messages. At the end of the day, particularly in the UK, I think we're really lucky. There are tons of networks where you can go and pitch and put yourself in front of people. Someone in the audience will speak to you. And so use LinkedIn, use the networks, things like the seed stage. An amazing way to get out in front of a lot of people, a lot of investors. And honestly, Google VCs in your sector. There are lists of VCs everywhere. That people have collated and put out there, and just start emailing, start connecting, sending messages. It's real painful.
It's starting somewhere, because like Jade, Lucy and I are not from a business background, and none of us had a business before like this, and it was all new to us. So it was talk to anybody that you know who has done this before. Actually, people are super open. I worked as a graphic designer, and I was like, now I'm like, my God, it was horrible. I didn't know it was horrible, but like people are not supportive in that industry at all. The startup world is incredible. People want to help you. They want to put you in touch with people, and they'll give you time. And it's definitely that start somewhere. Some of the incubators we've been involved with help. But actually, our lead investor came because Jade was speaking at an event about digital fashion. So her PhD is kind of like the psychology of digital fashion and how we represent ourselves online, in the metaverse, etc. And she was speaking at that, and Mark, who is our lead investor, heard her speak, asked her to contribute to a book he was writing, and then asked for a chat. So in the meantime, Lucy, who's been leading on our investment, has been like pitching left, right, and centre. You know, that becomes her full-time job. And then Mark says, oh, do you want a chat? And they didn't pitch, it was just the two of them, and they didn't pitch to him. They thought they were having a chat about what Loanhood was. And by the end of the conversation, he said, yeah, I'm in, I'll be your lead investor. And they called me, and by the way, we just got our lead investor. And I was like, what? They said, what were you doing? You weren't doing a pitch today. So it came from someone unexpected, and he brought in the second one. So he had the guy that he had had a business with and exited, and they both made their money from that. They now invest, and they like to invest together because they complement each other's skill sets. That's kind of interesting when you start to bring in investors. What do they bring to the business, and then what mix of people are you bringing in?
I think just some of the common themes we see from a lot of our founders are, one is they all start on Crunchbase. So if you go to Crunchbase, you can search any business that's in your field whatsoever, and you can see who's invested in them. So you can very quickly see who invests in your type of business. Another point that often comes up are just how important referrals are, but more importantly, where those referrals come from. So we hosted a session in New York last week on this, where they're effectively saying a couple of them had introductions to investors from family members, and in a way that was less valuable than if it had come from another founder that truly understands the space. So I think that's definitely one to think about. And then an interesting piece of advice I was given not so long ago is actually, once you've created your perfect list of investors, so say you do that on Crunchbase, is to actually include a few that are not perfect and use them as, I don't know if this is the right term, but burner meetings, where you effectively go and just try out your valuation, try out certain ways of pitching, and you're not going to be distraught if it doesn't go the way you expect. So
I think something else that we've just picked up on is that because there are other fashion rental platforms out there, Lucy pitched to someone who said, I think I've seen this pitch deck this week already. She said, no, you haven't. And it's like, actually, I'm no doubt that our pitch decks, in fact, I've seen one of them, like they're pretty similar. You know, they're pulling some of the quotes from the same research and all this kind of thing. So then we were like looking at like, where are they in their investment journey? And it's like, oh, they're closing in at the end of the month or something. We're going to wait and then go back out once they've closed, because then we're not talking to the same people. Or if we do speak to people, it might be people who've got a bit of FOMO because they didn't actually go for it. So there's a little bit of that as well. Like if you do have people in your space or competitors, look at where they are in their investment journey, look at, you know, it's difficult. Like there might be someone they'd be perfect, but they've already invested in your competitor. Then they're out. But yeah, keep an eye on what other people are doing as well.
yeah, cool.
James. Okay. Oh, I was going to say, James just said something. Look on Crunchbase at who's invested in them, but also more importantly, look at who's not there. Because I guarantee there will be a competitor fund who didn't get in on the deal. And if they've managed to get funding and they're doing really well, a bunch of other funds in the same sector will be sharking around looking to get in on what's next. So look at who's there and look at who's not there.
Thanks, Eve. Super impressive for both you guys. On that, around the funding piece, how did you come up with your valuation, especially in the initial days?
I'm kidding.
It is a bit like that, and we changed quite a bit because it depends who's around you. Because again, don't come from this background. These numbers sound mental to us. We're like, I don't know, that sounds like a lot of money. But so you take advice from people around you, and with our tech partners, we were looking at actually going for a much larger round to raise a lot more money, put a much higher valuation on it. And I think that they were kind of thinking more in terms of how much is raised in the States. It's much easier to get large sums of money in America. And also your markets are bigger over there. So like that's kind of was actually turned out like actually probably not right for us in the UK. It was like we were getting feedback like that's quite ballsy. That's quite a lot for like, you know, products not in the App Store yet and you haven't got traction yet. And in the end, it's sort of then we kind of reduced that. And then when we did find our lead investor, he has been through the founder route already. And actually, at the really early stages, I think that's really important because VCs, the people who are working in those companies are actually corporate people and they haven't been through the experience of setting up a business and they haven't been through that bit of like, if we don't get the investment in by the end of next month, it's game over. So having someone who has done that is good. So he looked at where we were at and he's like, right, we've got this MVP, it's in the App Store, it needs a bit of polishing. We don't have the traction, we don't have the numbers of people on the app. But for us, the problem was we'd spent our money and we couldn't pay for the marketing to get the people on the app. So what he and our two investors have done, it's like we've taken a smaller amount from them to polish the app, get the marketing in place, get the numbers on so we can go back out. So that's kind of interesting. Like if your first investors like can see where you are in your journey and make you more investable. You talked about that. It's like what we need to do now is make ourselves investable. And that's definitely, I think, the phase that we're in at the moment.
Yeah. I think one of the other things that I've had come up 2 or 3 times is actually just looking at others in your industry, so any other exits, and if you can do some digging and see how they valued themselves in the earlier days, then I guess that's a way of doing it as well. But I know you were joking, it's not a million miles off of what Tess said at times.
It's so I read Brad Feld's book, Venture Deals. I listened to it 3 times before I raised my first round. It's if anyone who's on the cusp of fundraising, read that book. It makes you actually sound like you know what you're doing. You don't, but at least you sound like you do. I think I also bought the Pocket Guide to Valuing Your Company, the Pocket Guide to Cap Tables, the Pocket Guide. They're these sort of tiny, tiny things. And people at the time saw them on my desk and thought it was hilarious. You know, and if I had £1 for every time I was told I'm going to fail, I probably wouldn't need to fundraise. But that pocketbook was brilliant because they built an Excel spreadsheet that modeled out cap table and dilution across 4 funding rounds, A, B, C, D, pre-seed, seed, and what I ended up doing was mapping out our major milestones, mapping out the capital requirement to get to each of those, and then mapping out how much of this company I wanted to own by the time I got to Series A, Series B. And then you look at the dilution. And so I worked it backwards from what is a reasonable amount of my company to give away in order to get me to the next point, the next milestone, at which I give away a little more of my company. You know, that's kind of the deal when you're raising a venture fund, you're creating a venture funded company, you give parts of it away. But I would definitely like model out subsequent funding rounds and how much money you need to get to where you need to go. And for that amount of money, how much of your company are you willing to give away? It's where I got to.
Cool.
Yeah, I had a follow-up question from before. So I think the saying is bad money is worse than no money. How did you go about with your investor criteria? So knowing who you wanted involved in your business and...
So I don't think that's true because bad money can end up costing you your entire company. And it nearly did for me. So yes, I mean, look, no money is pretty bad. But if you're in the privileged position of raising your first round, you don't have burn anymore. You can go and sustain yourself with other sources of income. Don't compromise. Don't put yourself in a position where you could potentially compromise your company. I think do DD on your investors. Ask them to recommend a founder for you to speak to, but also go and figure out who they've invested in and back channel. Don't just take the recommendations. And go and speak to other founders. There is an amazing anonymous founder network where you can rate VCs, and they're amazing. I'll find it. I'll try and share it with James. I can't remember the name of it anymore, but actually on Twitter, you just DM the account and ask to be put in an anonymous WhatsApp group. And you are then put in an anonymous WhatsApp group where there are founders who are literally saying, this just happened in my boardroom. I just had a board meeting and this investor from this VC was texting his girlfriend the whole way through. And I'm on a WhatsApp group where I'm like, and now we're in a position where fertility is blowing up. There aren't many medical devices companies. We've just closed 2 mil. And some of the VCs who I see on the WhatsApp group are like, hey, are you raising right now? And I'm like, yes, but not from you. You start to be able to say no. Like, that's an awesome feeling when you can say no. But don't take the bad money. It's tempting. Don't do it.
I think that for us, there's like a reputational thing as well. So we operate in the fashion industry, and the vast majority of the fashion industry is what we're trying to move away from, do differently. So we have to be careful that we don't take money from someone that we'd get called out for down the line. But you touched on something that I think is important as well, which is about, there's the runway for your business, but you're going to have a personal runway as well. Like, there's going to be a bit when you're not earning any money, especially if you bootstrap at the beginning like we did. So if you do, you taught, I did freelance graphic design. Lucy Airbnb's her house. Like, it's like anything and everything you can do. Like, if you haven't set up your business yet, it's like prepare yourself for that. Prepare yourself for needing to cut out loads of things from your life, not being able to go on the holiday with your mates or have a big family holiday or whatever it is, and find out like what are those things that you can do to supplement your income, teaching, like freelance something or other. I mean, obviously we are a sharing economy business, so I would say get your car on car share, get your tent on tent share, get anything else on Rent My. There's loads of ways you can just bring little bits of income into your life. But that might be the thing that enables you to keep going, like on the hard times, because there are hard times at the beginning.
Cool. I did not know tent share was a thing.
I did not know tent share was a
the
thing.
lady who runs tent share lives in Royston, so she's just down the road. Very nice lady called Rebecca.
There we go.
You can basically rent in.
That's a really helpful segue to my question, actually. And there's probably going to be a bit of a ramble before I ask the question, because it was great to hear from you about there's no good point, and I'm probably a couple of years, probably being kind to myself, probably a bit more than a couple of years behind you in terms of, you start to get dependents on, etc. And I'd be interested to hear your stories of advice or input around at what point it stops being your secondary focus and becomes your primary focus, if you know what I mean. So when are you not squeezing it around a job and it's not a hobby, this is your future and it's not you're not running it in parallel, it becomes your priority?
I think for me that's so case by case, depending on, I don't think there is one answer to that. As I say, my position at the time was baby on the way, about to get the promotion, like that was not the right time to do it, but as I say, I can't think of a better time between now and then. Well, honestly, I don't know the answer to that.
So 3 co-founders, 3 different stories, and they kind of weave in together. Jade was studying and is still studying part-time. So, gosh, let's see. My story first, it's easier to tell a personal story, isn't it? So I'm a graphic designer. I freelanced most of my working life. I've never really slotted into like a corporate life and got promotions and what. I've just kind of dipped in, come away, done some freelance, done something else, learned loads from all these different companies, but it wasn't such a big deal for me. I was able to kind of mix the two, because even before lockdown, some of the clients I worked for were allowing me to work remotely, which meant I could just kind of get away with it a bit, and it was a bit half and half. And then probably from the beginning, pre-lockdown, but early 2020, I was kind of like going for it and doing this, but still bits and bobs. another 6 months or so before I was kind of all in. Lucy had a business before. She had a restaurant which she had wound down, sold the lease on, had gone back into a job but was desperate to find the next business. She jacked her job in like too soon, probably. Like it took us, we're not from a tech background, we had no idea how long it was going to take to build the app. So she like jumped in 2 feet, let's do this. And she probably could have stayed in her job a bit longer, made her like personal runway last a bit longer. And as I said, Jade was studying when she came up with the concept. So then there was like, well, she's still going to be doing her master's. And then she had a full-time job for a while because she wasn't in a situation where she had that kind of, you know, I had design that I could do flexibly. She didn't have that. And then she has decided to carry on with her PhD. So what was the question? When's the right time to do it?
I was just wondering if there was any kind of common threads around pivot to it being.
I think sometimes it's like we've got, if we don't, I think it's a bit like if we don't do it now, there's not enough effort going, it won't take off because we've got to put more hours and more effort in. I think that you'll feel that tension and that pull. But we kind of mentioned beforehand, like when you have co-founders, that's really difficult to navigate as well. Like I said, like in the end, Jade has decided to carry on with her PhD. So there was but we didn't know that was going to happen when we started. So there was this point where it was like, are you coming on full time or not? Or what? And also Lucy had a baby, by the way, also. So, she was very like, it's not going to stop me and going to carry on. And it's not to say I didn't believe her at all. I don't mean that at all. But what I mean is like, I have other friends who have babies and the whole perspective on life changes when the baby comes. So we didn't know how that was going to play out. So those early days are like, it feels like it's a big leap, it's a big risk, it's a big kind of like, you've got to put your faith in these other people, and maybe you just have to accept that, you know, it might not work out, whether that's the co-founder relationship or the business might not take off. Like, that is the thing that you're doing. And we had a little, like, hold steady. Like some weeks you're like, oh my God, what am I doing? It's like, don't make a decision this week, just hold steady. And then next week is different. And I think there's quite a lot of that.
Yeah, terrifying whenever you do it though. Like you've got to, I guess, let go of the side at some point, and it's always going to be terrifying. So
like, I never had the fear of like leaving the corporate job thing because I could never quite click into that anyway. Every time I took a full-time job, I'd be in it 6-8 months and I'd be ready to leave again. So that bit wasn't like like the whole like, I don't care where my next paycheck's coming from because I was a freelancer. Like that bit is not in my brain is wide like that. That wasn't an issue for me. I think for Jade, probably it was more, you know, she wanted the stability for a while. Yeah, everybody's different. Everyone's different from that point of view.
I think the common theme is, it's for me, it's all about personal runway. So I worked out how much money do I need to survive. So when I'm personally like high conviction, so when I decided that I wanted to start the company, I was like, well, obviously this should be my number one thing. But practically, I need money to survive, so how much do I need? And then what is the bare minimum I can do to get that so that I can make this my number one thing? And at what point does this become sufficiently number one to where I can take a check from it, put that aside, and focus full time? So I think it's work out what you need to survive and how to get it in the sort of lowest effort way.
Cool. At the back.
I was just wondering, how did you choose your co-founders, and why did you decide to have a co-founder in the first place, in your specific case?
They came to me, so that I knew them. Like I said, very personal. Jade had for 10 years had been a flatmate of someone I'd known from my hometown. We knew each other. We'd be at parties occasionally, but she knew that I was passionate about sustainability and fashion. She knew that. Jade had the idea. She went to Lucy, very good friend of hers, very business-minded. Lucy got it, and then they came to me because they needed the creative side. So it was a bit of a no-brainer. I suppose at the time, I was thinking about going to do a master's in sustainability of some sort. And they came to me with this, and I was talking to a friend to get advice, as you do, and he said to me, well, what are you going to do after your master's? I said, I don't know, start a business like this. And he said, well, do it now then, don't do the master's. So, yeah, it wasn't, it came to me, it wasn't an active choice.
So I was the other way. I got introduced to my co-founder, who was posting all sorts of messages across all sorts of Facebook groups saying, hey, looking for a female co-founder. Does anyone know anyone? And at the time, I was sort of in a completely different sector, actually working on something else. And a lawyer I was speaking to said, do you want an intro to this guy? And I was like, no, but okay. And I met him, really liked what he was working on, thought the idea was phenomenal, started talking to some people going through fertility issues. We actually, so First Round Review, awesome resource for all things founder. They did an article titled 50 Questions to Get to Know Your Co-Founder. And we did that question after question. And we would take one first and we'd flip, and it took us hours to get through this thing. And at the end of that, we decided that we're going to go and create this business. And that's not fail-safe, right? He exited less than a year later. So it doesn't always work out, but it was a pretty good place to start. If you're meeting a stranger, you're getting married, the average startup takes longer to exit than the average marriage does take to break down. So you're going to be in it for longer than you would be married.
I think this might be my longest relationship and job also. Like I've said, I've flitted around different jobs.
Get to know him.
This is,
Yeah.
And also kind of, we've got to know each other not just like personally, but also how we work well together and how we don't work well together. So like, we've all got different strengths. Lucy and I are very good at working on like one thing together, like literally like in tandem working on something. But when like we work with Jade, or when I work with Jade, like we have a different way of like communicating. So we have to work differently. Like Lucy and I can be literally in the same document doing stuff. If I work with Jade, we have to be more structured because our brains maybe are too similar or something. Mm-hmm. So you get to know each other in those really practical ways as well.
Yep. Did you have a question?
Yeah. Related to this question, I think it was Will Smith who said something about don't have plan B because you're distracted from plan A. So my first question is, did you have plan B or an exit plan? And how important is it?
I don't have a plan B.
No plan B.
Yeah, my BAO was always my plan A. My plan B when I was working nights and teaching exec ed was really to fund being able to work on the startup. So I personally don't have a plan B. I think it does distract you from plan A. Startups will absorb your entire being. They really don't let you have a plan B. Honestly, you do get really drawn in.
Yeah, no plan B. I mean, I have a fallback, as it were. Like, if this doesn't work, I'll pick up graphic design and then figure out what to do next. So, like, that's maybe, I don't know your backgrounds. I don't mean to be rude, but you don't look like you're 21 and you've got no life experience. Like, I'm sure you've got some fallback stuff.
Sounds offensive if you don't word that right, doesn't it?
Well, I'm just, also not like, I'm 40. I feel like I can say things like that now. It's fine.
I'd say it's less a plan B and more if it fails, you can support yourself whilst you get back on your feet and figure out what to do next.
Yeah. I'm assuming that you don't have children, but you mentioned that your friend has.
Yeah.
Maybe you can speak for her, because that's one of the things that kind of freaks me out, that you're in a point when you have to make that decision, like either your company is your baby or you have a real baby, and as a woman I wonder how it's been for her.
I think that let me think what she's told me, so I'm not misrepresenting. She always knew she wanted to be a mother. That was not a question. And I think, you know, when we started the business, she was relatively newly married, and that was going to be part of her plan. And Lonehood wasn't so established that it would be worth not having a kid for, frankly. And I think it's been, when we started up, we kind of like, we want remote, you know, lockdown hadn't happened, remote working wasn't a thing, but we were kind of aware that what we were doing was allowing people to have micro businesses that you could run from home, so you could be renting out clothes. And actually that is really great for mothers, for new mums, and they might have a whole wardrobe of clothes they don't fit into anymore, so they can't wear them anyway. So there was this idea, certainly, even if you, like not having children, but being around your friends and family that do have the kids, it's been really painful for me personally to watch some of my best mates just not be able to find a place in the world of work after they've had children, because they just can't juggle the cost of childcare and all the rest of it. And actually, you know, you starting your own business is bonkers, but it's on your own time. So Lucy works flexibly, you know, she's going to go and pick up and drop off Jolie around to her mum's house or whatever it is. Like, that's fine. Like, I don't even notice if and when she's doing it, because we don't work in the same office anyway. I'm not going to say it's been easy, but I don't know any parent that would say that having kids is easy. Honestly, it's like, it's a massive challenge, and it is even if you have a job with maternity leave and paternity leave and all the rest of it. If you want to have a family, have a family. Don't let having a business get in the way of that.
Yeah, I think just from a male point of view as well, it's really hard. Like, it's a lot harder than I expected. So with the Founder Network, we travel a lot. We're in the States a lot and in Germany a lot and whatever else. And I just travel entire, like doing bedtime over FaceTime on a night in the middle of the day in New York sort of thing. Like, it's really not easy. But completely worth it on both sides. I'd never not found the business, and I'd never not spent the proper time with Mila, my daughter. So yeah, I wouldn't kid anyone for a second and say it's easy. It's definitely not, but both completely worth it. Yep.
Hi, bit of a practical question. How did you work with tech platforms, and how did you, because all of your business, you know, you're talking about an app, you're talking about websites, you've got a whole host of things going on in the background. How do you start that process? Just because we're doing, a lot of us are studying business, but we're not actually looking at the technical side of things, and we are not getting guidance on how we approach people, you know, web designers or app developers. Like, for me, that's a very intimidating part of the journey.
I would say that we started our business thinking we wanted to create this like sustainable fashion business. We didn't really think about the fact that we're a tech company when we started. It was a little bit of time for us to realise we were starting a tech company. And we went through a few, we didn't know either, actually. It was like we were trying to figure it out, talk to lots of people. Is there something out there that exists that we could use? Is there a web platform that there is for rental platforms, but it didn't quite fit what we wanted? Do we work with a single developer? How does it, in the end, where we've got to, and there's been other iterations of this, is we've kind of partnered with a tech company. So they have equity in our business. And so the deal that we have with them is part equity and part that we pay them. But we needed that level of expertise. So we were working with developers directly. We did that for our very first version of our MVP, but we didn't really know how to manage them and how to manage the workflow of like creating something so big in terms of tech. Be really honest with yourself. Think about your business. Like, is your business actually a tech business? Does it rely on a website or an app? And if that's the case, if you think about getting a tech co-founder. Like, if we could go back to the beginning, there's already 3 of us, which is a lot. If you could go back to the beginning, it's like you're starting a tech company, find a tech person to be your co-founder, because then they might be able to build your MVP, which would save you a fortune, and get you ahead quicker. Even for us now, it's like, okay, you know, what happens when this bit of development's done, and what if there's a bug, and who do we go back to? There's no one in-house that can just like fix that immediately. So figure out if your business is actually a tech business.
It's also never been a better time for low-code, no-code solutions. So low-code, no-code, which is great, and there are a bunch of platforms that allow you to very quickly spin things up. Go and test them with users, see if you've actually built something that people want. You know, things like Fiverr, Upwork, it's never been easier to build an MVP yourself. It's also never been easier to find a developer on these platforms who you can bring in once you've got that MVP, who can come in and start, you know, once you know what you want to build, it's so much easier to bring someone in and help you. So I think the resources are out there to help you do that.
There are drinks outside. What do you think about
continuing over a drink?
Grab a drink and continue the conversation, because there's not that many of us, so we can quite easily continue the Q&A. I think there's pleased to see that there's a lot of questions. But,
There was just one more. I know you've been waiting for a few question rounds.
It's very kind of you. I really appreciate your fascinating story. I just really wanted you to, please, the ladies, share us more about after you got funding, what your business looked like. You got mentioned about their share, commission, or the developing idea, decision making, your meetings. So I really want to know that. Thank you.
How much wine do we need?
The immediate thing is like, oh my God, we're paying ourselves. And I can't tell you how much stress that takes off your life. And it suddenly feels different. And I don't know, that makes a huge difference, that kind of personal runway thing, that makes a big difference. And then suddenly there's loads of people involved in your business. That's a big difference. It goes from like the few of you, and now it's like, okay, now we've got the tech team, and now we've got the marketing and PR people, and suddenly you've gone from like 3 of you to 20, 25 people. They don't all work for the business, but suddenly they're involved, and also having to let go of bits. Where when you're starting out, you're jack of all trades, and you're doing everything yourself. You start to hand over things to other people. I think
there's some key fundamentals. First of all, celebrate, because if you've closed a funding round, that's great. So finance, you're going to need a bank account, you're going to need Xero, you're going to need sort of a bunch of accounting systems, payroll, HMRC. You're going to need to set all of those up as a minimum if you're paying people. If you're employing people, you're going to need all of the legal documentation. So Seed Legals is a great platform for just template legal docs. They do a great job. Go and just R&D, rob a duplicate. You don't need to create your own. You're probably going to need baseline, a way for people to find you if you don't have it already, a website, a brand. If you've closed around, you likely already have a lot of these things. Email addresses. So there's sort of a baseline checklist of all of the stuff you need to just build the foundation and be able to actually operate. Do you have a way to coordinate and work? Google Apps for work, best way to do it. Drive, Docs, Sheets. You can sort of start to really coordinate and set up the ecosystem in which you do work. Slack, love and hate relationship with it, but it's a great way to communicate with your teams. Notion, Miro, Figma, all of these tools exist. They're all in the ecosystem already, and often they're free. And Zendesk, you're probably going to need some way to support customers. They have a startup program for free for 6 months. So there's a lot of, just cover off the basics. Set up a board. I know it sounds ridiculous, but for subsequent due diligence, people look for your board meetings and records. So do your corporate governance, just get the foundation right. By that point, you'll have brought people in, and they'll start to build with you. And so they'll bring all of their own ideas in too.
Cool. Well, thank you all very much for joining. Looking forward to chatting over a drink.